Britain is a place made by its landscapes. Our ancestors hewed mountains to build their homes, their cities. And these same rugged rocks, scarred by time, reflect our own natural resilience. But there is a gentler side to the landscape and our character, where the land, like the sea, seems to gather in rolling waves. The two sides combine to form the majestic land that is Britain. Here in the broad valleys, man has planted his garden and tended his animals. Here too he has raised great buildings which seem to grow out of the ground, man-made splendours to match those of nature. There can be no finer product of man's imagination than York Minster. There's been a religious building on this site since the 7th century, but the present cathedral dates from 1220. It was 250 years in the building, and so is a sampler of successive styles of English architecture. Generations of craftsmen have worked on local limestone to fashion images to the glory of God and to the glory of man. They represent our aspirations and our fears. And the work is never finished. In the Minster workshops, masons strive to reproduce the delicacy of carving that went into the originals. Just so with the stained glass, the finest collection of medieval glass in the country, some of which was damaged in the near-disastrous fire of 1984 and which had to be painstakingly restored. The medieval east window is the largest in the world, the size of a tennis court. John Thornton, the artist, spent 3 years on it and was rewarded with the sum of 4 shillings a week. The very fabric has required careful restoration. In the 1960s, the East End was found to be leaning an alarming 2 feet out of true. Only new concrete foundations saved the Minster. The city walls are 3 miles in length, and though medieval, encompass a history that goes back to Roman times. If the scale of the walls was not enough to warn off would-be attackers, then the sight of previous attackers' heads displayed on the city gates probably did the trick. In the heart of York, St Mary's Abbey was founded in 1089. It was the wealthiest Benedictine foundation in the north. Rievaulx Abbey belonged to the more austere Cistercian order, whose monks built it in the 12th and 13th centuries. It stands today like a perfect intact skeleton on the banks of the River Rye and overlooked by the wooded Hambleton Hills. Other men have set out to demonstrate not the depth of their faith, but the depth of their pockets. One of the richest men in the country in 1700 was Charles Howard. Wanting a country house to reflect his status, he employed Sir John Vanbrugh, later to build Blenheim Palace, to create the flamboyant Castle Howard. This fantasy palace was Vanbrugh's first architectural creation, and it shows how exuberance and inexperience can combine to produce great architecture. He was unaware that domes did not usually feature in English country houses, so he built one and had it painted by Pellegrini. In fact, it took the practical skills of his assistant Nicholas Hawksmoor, who had trained under Wren, to give shape to many of his ideas. But whatever the division of credit, the Great Hall, at once heavy with grandeur and skittish with fancies, is a magnificent achievement. The Howard family have long been patrons of the arts, and the house's paintings include a portrait by Holbein of the 3rd Duke of Norfolk, whose family seat this once was. The gallery also has a more familiar Holbein, his painting of Henry VIII. The architect of the Dales was water. Not the gentle streams of today, but raging torrents from melting glaciers at the end of the Ice Age. They carved these deep sweeping valleys, which are now the province of the farmer. Long ago, he cleared the valley floors and built the stone walls that still form the checkerboard effect seen from on high on the hills. Hill farmers, a hardy race, bred equally hardy sheep. Once, in Tudor times, there were 3 times as many sheep as there were human beings. Every shepherd has his faithful dog, the watchful collie, whose uncanny understanding of his master's wishes would cow brighter subjects than these into obedience. The Pennines form the rocky backbone of England. At their southern end, they subside into the Derbyshire Dales. This is Dovedale, most dramatic and lovely of them all. The River Dove splashes its way through a sylvan scene, lingering in pools where trout and grayling breed. Isaac Walton took to fly fishing in these waters and found the inspiration for his book, The Complete Angler. Many a fisherman since has dreamed his own dreams, if only of ever bigger catches. Here in Derbyshire, on a canvas supplied by nature, man the farmer has painted a landscape whose grand sweep is unequalled elsewhere in England. Amid this scenery lies one of the greatest houses in all England, Chatsworth, built for the first Duke of Devonshire at the end of the 17th century in the classical manner. The first Duke had this part of the Derbyshire countryside tamed, and he employed the Frenchman Grillet to create the unique cascade. The interior is, if anything, even more magnificent. Every surface is decorated or gilded. Masterpieces adorn wall and ceiling alike, many the work of the French master Louis Laguerre. In the State Music Room is a harpsichord built in 1782. Like the leather-bound books on the table, it is a combination of English art and craft, and it is still in perfect playing condition. Laguerre's images stare down from the ceiling of the chapel. The alabaster altarpiece is the work of Samuel Watson of London. The Oak Room is named after the fine carvings introduced by the 6th Duke. He was also responsible for the library. Thanks to the 2 collections he bought to add to his own, it contains some 17,000 books and the knowledge of centuries. Here, the young Princess Victoria began to come to terms with her responsibilities. She dined for the first time with adults, learning social graces she was soon to employ as Queen. The house forms a magnificent backdrop for a parade by the Royal Household Cavalry. History is viewed through the other end of the telescope in neighbouring Nottinghamshire. No one can be sure if Robin Hood really existed, but like King Arthur, his exploits have inspired the English-speaking world, and his policy of robbing the rich to give to the poor reflects a very English respect for the underdog. The ancient trees which once sheltered the outlawing green survive still, but today bluebells flourish undisturbed by the feet of fighting men. Nottingham's own castle is a mansion and museum now, but nearby Belvoir Castle is worthy of the Sheriff of Nottingham himself, a perfectly reconstructed medieval castle straight from the pages of history or legend. The flow of history may be tempestuous, but like a great river, it goes on and on. The mighty River Trent, an ancient trading way, it curves placidly through the gentle Nottinghamshire countryside. Equally tranquil are the neat villages of Leicestershire. Here, generations of villagers have made their own quiet contribution to the English landscape. The houses are made of local stone, producing harmony despite the fact they were built many years apart. Even the bold viaducts which straddle the valleys, though vigorously opposed by country people when they first appeared as brash newcomers in the last century, now seem to blend happily with the landscape. The thatched cottage in a quiet lane. The curious chaffinch on its bough. A village green, what could be more perfectly English? Even so, some buildings do stand out as the magnificent products of their time. One such is Burghley House, built in the mid-16th century. Buried deep inside the stone walls, Burghley's kitchens give a good impression of the way life was lived in the great houses of the time, both below and above stairs. The meticulous labour required, every copper pot in its place, and the elbow grease needed to keep everything ship-shape and Bristol fashion. Upstairs, the lords and ladies had their minds on higher things. But the Italian painter Antonio Verrio's inspiration came not only from the pages of mythology, but also from the England he had come to love. Verrio spent 10 years at Burghley, and like many decorators, made himself thoroughly unpopular. His patron, the 5th Earl, quickly tired of his demands for himself and his entourage for creature comforts and Italian food just like Mama made. Verrio's well-fed form, the one by the pillar, is self-portrayed in the bizarre Heaven Room. His extraordinary perspectives give an impression of equally plump nymphs about to tumble from the clouds around the feet of us mere mortals. Humbler artisans than Verrio have also been inspired by the countryside and have interpreted it in stone, creating these Lincolnshire villages that are completely in tune with the land from which the builders earned their living. Crowland Abbey was founded in 716 by King Ethelbald. It has survived sacking, burnings and earthquakes, and it is still the village church. Its neighbour, Lincoln Cathedral, is 300 years younger. The bustling city of Lincoln predates the Romans, but is very much a living, a growing place, with each generation having built its own contribution in stone and brick. The surrounding countryside shows few such marks of occupation. The flowers take their turns to colour the scene, in particular rhododendrons and roses. Lincolnshire is the horticultural centre of Britain. The rose, symbol of England, has been cultivated here for hundreds of years, though not until modern times in such commercial profusion. Spalding is the capital of tulip land. They call this area Holland, and the land reclaimed from the sea here is equally good for growing bulbs. This flat, mysterious land reclaimed from the sea is the Fens, and on its edge lies Cambridge. For half a millennium, the chapel of King's College, Cambridge, has been famous for its choir. The Gothic chapel, begun by Henry VI and completed over a century later, seems to epitomise both the city and its university, town and gown. St John's was founded by the mother of Henry VII in 1511. Its sombre red brick frontage, reminiscent of Hampton Court, contrasts with the grace of its stone rear elevation. Trinity College was built by Henry VIII, using money from the monasteries he'd dissolved. This is Great Court. Only Oxford has quads. The college is a sampler of the work of the best architects and sculptors, Wren and Grinling Gibbons among them. the River Cam drifts along the backs of many of the old colleges. Punts glide along these green waters. It's harder than it looks, and many a punter has been left clinging to his pole as the punt drifts downstream. But you can always leave it to the experts. Undergraduates still cross Cambridge's Bridge of Sighs to reach their supervisors' rooms in St John's College. Ely, flagship of the Fens, the cathedral appears to float above the water meadows. Once this was an island, and Hereward the Wake, a name redolent with English defiance, resisted the Normans until they bridged the marshes. There has been a church here since the first coming of Christianity to England, and the present building dates back to the 11th century. The slender elegance of the nave is awe-inspiring, and its painted ceiling is one of the wonders of the medieval world. The artist was Alan de Walsingham, but he was architect and craftsman too, and his greatest achievement was to replace the central tower in 1322 with a unique octagon. Weighing 400 tons and 72 feet in diameter, this beacon for the Fens is an engineering feat hard to repeat even with modern techniques. Blickling Hall in Norfolk reflects the self-confidence of another age, the Jacobean. Its perfectly symmetrical and immaculately preserved frontage has withstood the caprices of architectural fashion and the whims of great men, and its future is assured as the home of the East Anglian division of those safeguarders of our heritage, the National Trust. Castle Rising has been knocked about a bit, though by armies, not architects. Even so, it is a remarkably well-preserved Norman building, thanks perhaps to the earthworks that surround it. This area is no less famous for the beauty of its humbler architecture, the villages of Norfolk, each with its church that seems quite out of proportion to the size of the community. For the area grew rich on wool, and the merchants were keen to display their wealth. The green, now most often used for cricket, was common land, owned by a local landowner who would grant villagers the right to graze their animals. Many of these rights persist to this day. Few English cities present such a bucolic face to the world as Norwich. The old Saxon city is the capital of the region and retains intact its ancient street pattern. The elegant cathedral is Norman, though the striking spire and the nave date from the 15th century. Inside it is all spaciousness and light. Sandringham House. When the future Edward VII was bought the estate for his 21st birthday, he had it turned into a royal home in the fashionable neo-Jacobean style. It's the favourite country retreat of the present Queen. This is Constable country. The painter captured better than any other the essence of the English countryside. Flatford Mill on the banks of the tranquil Stour and Willie Lott's cottage, named after the farmer who lived there for 88 years. These are images more reproduced than any, yet their freshness remains. One countryside character well known to Constable was the gamekeeper. Contrary to the belief of many town dwellers, his main duty has always been to protect the wildlife on his estate, not from the attentions of man in the form of the poacher, but from nature's predators, even the exotic jay. Though the tools of his trade are rightly limited today, he can still ensure that pheasants and other game birds survive to maturity. The badger, one of the most popular creatures with the public, but less so with the gamekeeper. In fact, these lovable animals are carnivorous and so seldom do much damage to the farmer's livelihood. As a result, the killing of badgers is now against the law. At Saxted Green, the sails continue to turn. Though restored, the mill has been spared the indignity of many which have been turned into holiday homes. Warwick Castle was first erected by the Normans in 1068, but most of what we see today is a 14th century reconstruction. It stands on a sandstone bluff overlooking the River Avon, one of the most easily defended sites in the country, and these curtain walls have never been parted. Sir Walter Scott described this view as unsurpassed in all England. The castle last saw military service in the Civil War, when the ancestor of the present owner, Lord Brooke, fought against the king. The robustness of the walls is shown by how few marks are left by the conflict. The inhospitable gateway is defended by 2 stout portcullises, which could be lowered in time of siege, and above which are the murder holes through which arrows could be fired at attackers. The legacy of its history as a parliamentary stronghold can be seen in the collection of armour which was left behind by Cromwell's army when it was garrisoned here. A grimmer reminder by far of those days of civil strife is the death mask of the Lord Protector himself. Warwick Castle is a veritable treasure trove of English military history. The English landscape has always been stained with blood, and many of the scars remain to this day. But one turreted building never intended for offensive or defensive purposes was the Broadway Tower, a folly built by the Earl of Coventry in the 1790s, just to give him something to look at from his house 20 miles away. More gruesome are the tales to be told by these walls. Berkeley Castle has been a family home for 800 years, but its apparent domesticity belies a ghastly past. These Brussels tapestries, which depict the story of Sodom and Gomorrah, have witnessed other tragedies. Even the long drawing room, for all its elegant furnishings and family portraits, may have been the setting for the direst of plots, the deaths even of kings. For at Berkeley in 1327, Edward II met the most unpleasant end of any English monarch. His death was chronicled by the playwright Christopher Marlowe in his play Edward II. Some of William Shakespeare's early plays have been dubiously attributed to Marlowe, but what is certain is that the bard himself was born in Stratford in 1564, the son of a local merchant. He lived and was married in the town before leaving for London to embark upon a career as an actor and to establish himself as the greatest playwright the world has known. As a result, visitors come in ever greater numbers to the town's half-timbered streets, just as Shakespeare himself was drawn back here to live out his final years near the wooded banks of the River Avon, which had inspired so much of his pastoral writing. The rolling Malvern Hills are about as English as you can get, and they provided the inspiration for that most English of composers, Edward Elgar. Worcester Cathedral has one of the finest settings in all England. Its chancel is the resting place of King John and Prince Arthur, who would have been king in Henry VIII's place had it not been for his early death. We can only speculate on how many more of the original medieval interiors might have remained had Arthur not died and allowed his brother to despoil so many of our cathedrals in his English Reformation. Fortunately, much of Worcester's medieval stained glass has survived. And nothing could take away from the Norman cathedral's crowning glory, the magnificent tower which was added in the 14th century. Hereford Cathedral too was centuries in the making and is still being remade. As the soft red sandstone weathers and returns to the land from which it sprang, new stones must be cut and put into place. This ancient skill is little changed. The same hand tools are used in the same way to turn nature into art. The nave is airy but substantial. Its broad Norman pillars lend the place an air of solidity quite absent from later cathedrals. But there is a sense of frivolity, by contrast, about the choir, where wood and stone are carved with equal felicity. The cathedral is home to one of the most precious maps in Europe, the Mappa Mundi. Made in 1275, it demonstrates the medieval view of the world centred on Jerusalem. Shropshire is a land of strange beauty. This is border country, whose rolling hills have been fought over by the Welsh and the English. The Wrekin broods like a beautiful slag heap over the surrounding plain, while the gentler outlines of the Long Mynd have provided good grazing for generations of sheep. It's hard to imagine that these picturesque valleys were the birthplace of the Industrial Revolution, which transformed this country from an inward-looking island into a great world power. In 1709, Abraham Darby built the world's first iron bridge, 200 feet across the Severn, to advertise his new smelting process. The Industrial Revolution also gave us the iron horse. If iron provided the means of production, railways gave us a means of transporting those goods, and ourselves, transforming not only our way of making a living, but also making the world a much smaller place. With 16 miles of track and more standard gauge engines than any other preserved railway, the Severn Valley is a vivid reminder of those great days of steam. North Wales is one gigantic and intricate train set. Even the engines themselves are miniature. The Festiniog Railway runs 13 miles along an old slate quarry line. Another reminder of past industrial splendour is provided by the Llangollen Canal. The spectacular Pont Casilti aqueduct crosses the River Dee at a height of 120 feet. It's 1,000 feet long and was designed by the great engineer Thomas Telford. Though in the main canals are used for recreation today, there are still over 2,000 miles of navigable canals in this country, and those of Wales are among the most beautiful and dramatic. The English King Edward I was determined to put an end to Welsh opposition, and after victory in battle, he built a series of mighty fortresses to demonstrate the power of the English crown, such as this one at Caerphilly, the largest and most complete castle in all Wales. Today, the relationship between the Principality of Wales and England is altogether more peaceable. Since the Act of Union in 1536, the two countries have had common forms of administration, and the Queen today receives as warm a welcome here as elsewhere in her kingdom. Powys Castle, unlike the majority of Welsh castles, was built by the Welsh themselves. It was begun in 1200 and took centuries to complete. Powys was a stronghold of warring princes. The castle was transformed over the centuries, so it now more resembles an Italian palace than an instrument of war. Nothing, though, could be more peaceful than the beautiful Wye Valley. The scene is little changed since Wordsworth wrote his lines a few miles above Tintern Abbey. The noble ruins of the Cistercian monastery on the banks of the River Wye have inspired the paintings of Turner as well as the poems of Wordsworth. Geologically, the mountains of Wales have much in common with those of the Lake District. These hills were carved 50 million years ago from rocks that are 500 million years old. Slates laid down in an ancient sea are overlaid with lava and ash from a period of violent volcanic activity. The whole has been shaped by the weather into an awe-inspiring landscape. Few places in the world can provide such contrasts as the English Lake District. From the gentle valleys with their patchwork of fields to the bony shoulder of Scawfell Pike, England's highest peak. This is a majestic region. Landscapes such as these dwarf mankind and serve to remind him of his own mortality. Here, mountain and lake complement one another perfectly. Glaciers have left their marks on these rocks, scratching the surface with giants' fingernails and drowning the valleys, leaving blue ribbons of lakes. Lake Windermere is a jewel in this landscape. The poet Keats maintained that no view in the world could exceed or even equal it. And together with other romantic poets such as Wordsworth and Coleridge, he helped to popularise the area. Until that time, cultured man had looked to the city for his inspiration. Now the untamed beauty of such vistas was something to be admired and visited, no longer shunned. The ancient cathedral city of Durham has managed to live up to its spectacular setting on a high peninsula, an island almost, in the River Wear. The cathedral was founded in 1093 and houses the bones of one of England's favourite saints, the shepherd boy Cuthbert. Raby Castle in County Durham was built in the 14th century around an 11th century manor. 700 men could be mustered within its crenellated walls. It stands now at peace within the moat that once held its enemies at bay. The Romans were similarly motivated when they left an indelible mark on the landscape with Hadrian's Wall. Built in a mere 5 years and 73 miles long, it stretches right across the neck of Britain and succeeded in keeping out the unconquered Scots until the Romans' departure, when they swarmed back across the border. In some ways, the scenery of the north of England could be said to be a dress rehearsal for the drama that is Scotland. But the opening scenes are quiet enough. The borders are an area of gentle beauty, rolling hills and wide views. Like the Welsh marchlands, these too have been fought over in centuries past. Hermitage Castle was built in the 14th century around an earlier tower. It was home to the Earl of Bothwell, Mary Queen of Scots' lover. She rode 40 miles to visit him when he lay injured. Even amid the old battlegrounds, there are defiant enclaves of civilization, great houses with their ballrooms and dining rooms. 15th century Traquair House is the oldest inhabited building in Scotland and home to the Stuart family. Bonnie Prince Charlie rode through these gates on his ill-fated attempt to defeat the English. The 5th Earl swore that they would remain closed until the Stuarts regained the throne of England. And so they have. Today, Manderston is the epitome of the gracious Edwardian country house. William Miller bought the original 18th century house and his son Sir James set about transforming it. This remarkable silver staircase, based on Madame de Pompadour's one at Versailles, used to take 3 men 3 weeks to clean. When labour became scarce between the wars, it soon tarnished, and remained so until 1980, when an Edinburgh couple volunteered to restore it. Much of the work we see today was inspired by Robert Adam, architect of Kettleston Hall in Derbyshire. This was owned by Lord Scarsdale, whose daughter married the heir to Manderston, Sir James Miller, who was clearly keen to impress his influential new father-in-law. Fleur's Castle is the genuine article, built by Robert Adam himself, though no one will guess it, for the plain Georgian house has been overlaid with such architectural fancy that it looks more like a castle on the Loire than one on the Tweed. The novelist Sir Walter Scott, who lived nearby at Abbotsford, first drew visitors to Melrose Abbey with his description in The Lay of the Last Minstrel. Built by Cistercian monks who travelled from Rievaulx in Yorkshire, it is the reputed resting place of the heart of another great Scottish hero, Robert the Bruce. Scott's own final resting place is here, among the romantic ruins of the 12th century Dryborough Abbey. It has been in this state since the 16th century, when it was the victim of one of the constant cross-border raids. These borderlands are dotted with abbeys, here Benedictine Kelso, each built by its own community, symbols of piety that have withstood the ravages of time. Royalty, too, has left its mark. Scone Palace is where Scottish kings were crowned for 500 years. The dining room houses a collection of 70 European ivories. The Monteith bowls were a gift to the owner, Lord Mansfield, on his coming of age by his maternal grandmother. The drawing room, the perfect place to relax to a piano accompaniment, while grander musical themes belong in the long gallery. This magnificent room, more than the length of 2 cricket pitches, was used to entertain Queen Victoria with a demonstration of curling on the polished oak floor. Mary Queen of Scots lived here at Falkland Palace in the 1560s. The style is Scottish Renaissance. The cosy interiors belie the severity of the outside, but sadly few of the original 16th century fittings remain. The visit of Charles I in 1633 caused such a frenzy of refurbishment that most of the work of the French court-trained craftsmen was covered up. Stirling Castle, built on an all but impregnable ridge, was home to Scottish kings until James VI of Scotland became James I of England and moved his court south. The castle today still guards the entrance to the Highlands. King Alexander I of Scotland died here in 1124, and it was a key target of Edward I of England in his wars against the Scots. Recaptured after Bannockburn by Robert the Bruce, it was restored to the Scottish monarchy until King James's translation. Glamis Castle, made famous by Shakespeare's Macbeth, has been visited by royalty since the 14th century, and they have been treated with greater courtesy than King Macbeth afforded his guests. Princess Margaret was born here, and the Queen Mother spent much of her childhood within these walls, enjoying, no doubt, playing in the crypt among the armour worn by her ancestors. Holyrood House in Edinburgh is still the Queen's official residence in Scotland. It was built by James IV of Scotland and rebuilt by Charles II of England. Today, the Scots Guards are at a parade before Her Majesty the Queen. The Scots Guards are one of the 5 Guards regiments in the British Army. They were formed in the 17th century to serve in Ireland, and in their familiar checkered cap bands, they've served subsequent kings and queens and their country the world over. The most regal Scottish residence of them all is Balmoral, the Queen's favourite holiday home in all Britain. It's a 15th century castle. The name derives from the Gaelic and means majestic dwelling. Prince Albert brought Queen Victoria here in 1848. She fell utterly in love with the castle and its setting, so he bought it for her and rebuilt it in the Scottish baronial style. Perhaps the major influence on Scottish life has been the clans, none more so than the Campbells. Here at Crowry Gardens on the banks of Loch Fyne, 3 generations of Campbells have left a peaceful, natural memorial. The gardens provide a rare home for the threatened red squirrel. It is thoroughly at home in Scots pine woods, though it can still be found elsewhere in Britain. It was perhaps the last mammal to use the land bridge which once linked us with Europe to colonise Britain. Its decline is not due, as is commonly thought, to attack by its cousin the grey squirrel, rather to disease. The grey, though, is a much less fussy eater and can live in a far wider range of habitats. The red squirrel is a shyer creature, preferring to stay in the treetops, descending only in search of food. But wherever it goes, it must always beware the ever-watchful buzzard. This bird of ill omen reminds us that man can turn predator too. The Scottish clans have always preyed on one another. Here at Glencoe, in 1692, Captain Robert Campbell, on behalf of the English King William III, massacred 38 of the rebellious MacDonald clan. The spirit of the dead lives on in this place. But for good and for ill, Britain's landscapes have shaped our destiny, have given us much to defend, and the wherewithal to defend it. Castles and palaces alike have all sprung from these rocks. Man has used his natural resources and his ingenuity to build a majestic land.